I'm Mike Foster, and welcome to this session of Rescue Academy. So we've been covering a lot of different ideas and strategies during these sessions, and I hope it's been helpful for you. I hope Rescue Academy is stirring up something inside of every one of you, a new passion, a fresh vision for your life and your role in the world. I'm praying this is giving you confidence to step out into the messy world out there and help bring love and hope to hurting people. And I want you to know this. I believe in you. I know you can do this. All those lies we've accepted about ourselves and our own brokenness, we're just not going to believe those anymore. You know those times in your life where you felt you were unqualified to help hurting people? We're just going to stop believing that ridiculousness and get out there and love on some people. Why? Because you can. And don't forget, only broken things can help make broken things beautiful again. And that's what you and I are. Unashamed, second chance people, ready to rock our world with unconditional love. So the goal of this series was to help you help others. We've talked about how the world needs more shame breakers, people who are all about radical acceptance, who create a safe place for others to take a risk, who listen for deeper truths and aim people towards change. We've talked about being a cheerleader for personal responsibility. But today, I want to begin a basic conversation on some important issues that every rescuer will eventually run into. And that's the issue of addiction. Right off the bat, those words sound kind of scary, don't they? They sound like extreme problems for highly trained people. And you know what? Sometimes they are. But a lot of times, I think perhaps most of the time, it's a situation where a rescuer can make a real difference and point a person towards help. So I want to spend this session unfreakifying this term addiction. I want to get rid of the stigma and negative labels and shine a light of truth and compassion on this topic. I want to help us baseline our understanding of the issue. And by the time we're done, my hope is that you can be a part of the solution rather than someone who looks the other way or stands on the sidelines feeling helpless. Okay. So let's start with addiction. That can be such a loaded word, can't it? It's like, ooh, addiction, addict. And the first thing that probably comes to our minds is a skinny, haggard person with needle marks up their arm, or a man stumbling through the street, drinking from a bottle stashed in a paper bag. It's those people on that reality show Intervention. It's those weak people who attend those AA meetings or go to that Celebrate Recovery group, or junkies, or those weak people who need to check into rehab. And listen, those are just horrible and unhelpful stereotypes. Honestly, these labels and stigmas and stereotypes are a big part of the problem. So as rescuers, we've got to start by embracing better truths about addiction. Avoid the cliches and labels and load up our toolkit with compassion, the facts, and of course, a huge dose of radical love. Okay, so let's start with this fact. Most addiction is not so obvious, and it probably doesn't look like you think it looks. So let's define addiction. Addiction is where we constantly seek something outside of ourselves to quench the insatiable yearning for the relief or fulfillment inside. Or think of addiction as a sign, a signal, a symptom of distress. And people's addictions always originate in pain, whether it is felt openly or hidden in our thoughts. So the question for us rescuers is never like, why the addiction, but why the pain? Just changing that question should change your whole viewpoint on this topic. It's not why the drugs or the pills, the alcohol, but what is the wound, the pain, the hole inside that hurts? And people can be addicted to anything, not only substances, but reliance on other people, codependency, severe spending, or meticulously saving, over or under eating, TV, being online, social media, gambling, religiosity, work, self-harm, sex, and pornography. I mean, literally, the list could go on and on. Because at the core of addiction is a void, an emptiness. An addict believes something is missing. One person said, addiction is filling one hole with a bigger hole. We try to fix the hole or the void by medicating and numbing, escaping, and it just creates a bigger hole. It doesn't fix anything. And we all do this to some extent. It's just that addicts, they take it to the extreme. They avoid the void with such an all-in commitment, everything else in their life begins to cave in. So with our own addictions, and by the way, I believe we're all addicted to something, You might just jump off the addiction diving board, but an addict jumps off a 50-foot cliff. They're not much different than you, except they're just willing to risk everything to fill that hole inside. And that's when it's time for a brave friend or family member to step in with radical acceptance and try to point them towards freedom and live with personal responsibility. With love, we say, let's get some help. So let me tell you a story about a friend of mine named Lance. Lance had come to one of our Rescue Lab workshops in San Diego, and I asked him to share his story with the group. So his story goes like this. So Lance, he was a preacher's kid, which meant he felt this pressure to be perfect, the perfect kid. And for a while, he was able to keep it up. He got really good grades, he excelled in football, everything looked great on the outside, but inside, this pressure to be perfect created a void he would do anything to avoid. As Lance shared his story with the group, he told us of this one day where someone offered some drugs and he took them. And for the first time in a long time, Lance felt good. The hole was filled. And that started a years-long journey of a hardcore drug use, along with all the lying and the stealing needed to cover it up. Lance puts it this way. He says, I cheated on life with every substance until I became the worst version of me. That's what addiction does. So one day at work, where, by the way, Lance led a $30 million project management firm, so much for that classic image of an addict, right? And so an uncle pulled Lance aside and got super honest with him. He told Lance about the downward spiral of dishonesty and rage and anger he saw in Lance's life. His uncle saw the pain and the addiction. Well, that interaction was the moment God used to get Lance to his own truth, to bring everything into the light and get some help. So after a 90-day stay at a wonderful rehab center, Lance says that God broke him in the best way possible. Well, Lance has made huge progress and is a total inspiration to me. He's a great guy. He's a hero to me because he has faced his void. He faced the hole inside, and now he's finding freedom. Lance also runs an organization called Hope is Alive that helps get addicts back on their feet with housing and support and job placement. I got to go out and see Lance and see his work in Oklahoma. I even got the chance to speak at this awesome event he put on. And I talked about second chances and met tons of the people that Lance is helping right now. It was really incredible and moving. And isn't that just, so cool? Broken people, helping broken people be beautiful again. Listen, recovery is hard. There are tons of relapses and do-overs, but Lance's story and countless others like it show us that rescuers can help people struggling with addiction. Addicts need a cheerleader, friends, people who can lovingly help them see the void that they're trying to avoid. They don't need religious tips or shame or labels or codependent enablers. They need you. Lance needed his uncle, a rescuer who loved him and helped him get help. So let's spend some time talking about some of the misconceptions about addiction. I heard people say these things about addicts, and honestly, when I hear them say these misconceptions, I just want to slap them, come on. But as a rescuer, we're not supposed to slap people. So let's talk about some of these misconceptions. Misconception number 1, addiction is a moral weakness. Misconception number 2, addicts just lack willpower. Misconception number 3, addicts just have a cowardly inability to face life. Misconception number 4, addiction is just a physical disease. Here's what I believe. I believe addiction is just a really destructive strategy to mend an empty, wounded heart. It is a disease, but it's a disease of the soul. You see, people don't have a drinking problem or a porn problem or a drug problem. They have an unknown problem with a drinking, porn, or drug solution. Did you catch that? Does that make sense? People don't have a drug problem. They have an unknown problem with a drug solution. The void, the hole, the wound, whatever it is, that's the problem. The addiction is just their destructive answer. So let's spend a few minutes talking about the gift that comes from the brokenness of addiction. Here's the deal. No one understands powerlessness like an addict. If you want to see the power of grace in action, go to an AA meeting or Celebrate Recovery meeting. An addict's new or restored connection to God through the process of 12-step recovery or therapy or both is the foundation of their new sober life. They are completely dependent on God for a new life. That's why recovery groups always say, don't leave before the miracle happens. It's a powerful phrase that means this will be hard. It may be the hardest thing you have ever done in your life, but a miracle is promised if you hang in there and do the inner work. So let me ask you a question. As a rescuer, do you think you could learn something from an addict? And I don't mean just like what not to do. I ask this because I myself had learned so much about love and grace and vulnerability and truth and authenticity from my friends in recovery. Every time I'm working with someone in the throes of an addiction, I remind myself that they are giving me a precious gift. They're showing me it's okay to face my own void, my own brokenness. They remind me of my own utter powerlessness in my own life that sometimes I forget is there. And for those addicts who are experiencing sobriety in their life, they are a genuine miracle. They are way ahead of me in a lot of ways in my own journey. Like they're honest, they're transparent, they're vulnerable, they're courageous and brave. Like this is the gift a recovering addict brings to the rest of us. So what can we learn from an addict? What can we learn from recovery culture? How about this? Addicts learn the difference between the sacred and the secret. This means they learn how to have boundaries with others and they know how to out themselves. In religious circles, accountability, right, is a big thing. And religious accountability often means people call or ask someone, so what's really going on? They have to call each other out. But in recovery culture, addicts are courageous enough to call out themselves. They pick up the phone and say, here's what I'm thinking about doing, and I'm calling you so that I don't do something stupid right now. They live by the motto, you're only as sick as your secrets. So let me ask you a question. Take a guess on which method of accountability is more transformational, religious accountability or recovery culture accountability. Also, addicts learn to keep good inner boundaries and not overshare. If something is truly sacred to them, they keep it close. They become more aware of respecting their own sense of dignity, something that they haven't been familiar with before. So lastly, one of the most beautiful things about recovery culture is that no one gets better on their own. No way. It takes community. We recover in community. In the same way, rescue culture understands the exact same thing. We heal together. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We support each other. We aren't islands. We aren't heroes. All of us, every single one of us, are flawed and broken, but healing together. So in closing, I want to give you 5 simple things you can do to help an addict. Number 1, help the addict see reality. It's what Lance's uncle did for him. He said, here's what I see. When you see someone in the throes of an addiction, you don't beat around the bush. We have to be loving, but also honest about what's going on. As a rescuer, you can play a big role in helping them move towards truth. So number 2, cheerlead ownership in their lives. Listen, you can't force an addict to take responsibility. You just can't. No one can force them to stop using. You can't demand it. You can't control them. And we talked about this in another session, but realizing you can't fix an addict is important. So don't even try. But you can empower them to move towards making a decision for sobriety and getting help, but it's always their decision. Number 3, avoid enabling an addict. Giving an addict money, buying them whatever they need, going back on healthy boundaries that you've already set in place for you in your life is not rescuing, but that's enabling. And there's a big difference between the two. Fight the temptation of enabling and don't allow yourself to be manipulated. By the way, enabling happens a lot. Often an addict's behavior becomes the reason for us to avoid us looking at our own addictions, to avoid our own void. Don't let that happen. So number 4, don't make ultimatums. Backing someone into a corner or forcing them to make promises they can't really keep, this is a bad plan for helping an addict. I know it gets frustrating and you can really literally come to the end of your rope sometimes. But when someone is held in bondage to an addiction, they are beyond making real commitments or responding well to your ultimatums. Remember the state of powerlessness that addiction creates? Threats only push them away. Always keep the door open for change when they are ready and willing to change. Number 5, bring others in. Addiction thrives in secrecy. I never ever think that I'm the only one to be involved in helping an addict. In fact, when I spot the signs of addiction, I immediately begin to bring community in. The addict loves for everyone to think they're okay and will always keep up this charade. It's easy to fool a few people, but it's harder to fool a community of loving friends and family and addiction specialists. In the addict's mind, the less people who know, the better. But community is key for healing and getting real help. Freedom comes when everything is brought into the light. Always be respectful in terms of who knows, but as a rescuer, you need to loop professionals in and other close friends and other family members. Why? Because we heal in community. Also, this is important. Professional care always needs to be an option here. I cannot stress this enough. The real physiological and deep emotional connections that are formed in addiction are significant. The brain and the body and the addict are complex dance partners. It's not simple stuff here. So understand your role, but bring professionals into the mix too. So in closing, if you come across someone avoiding the void, pay attention. Serve up some radical acceptance. Do some active listening. Love them by telling them what you see and how it's different from who they really are. Tell them about a recovery group in your area, 12-step, maybe even go with them. As a rescuer, I want you to destroy the stigmas and labels that society puts on addicts. Don't operate from those 4 misconceptions that we talked about. It's not right and keeps people trapped in their pain. Also, make sure you are dealing with your own void and that you are bringing that into the light too. Remember, as you start helping friends and family members who are struggling with addiction, lead with love and compassion. And don't lose hope, because I believe there's a miracle waiting to happen.